Hello, everybody. Welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. I'll be your moderator for today's show, and we have a special guest, Professor Meir Statman at Santa Clara University, who's a professor of finance that has a new book in the area of finance. But we're going to get started with the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. There's a lot of things happening with the U.S., but every time I see it, it seems like we go another day further in a deeper dollar in debt. So, David, give us an update. What's happening? Is the United States getting fiscally strong? I finally got your new book.
Congratulations, my friends. Congratulations.
Every time I ordered, they send me the old book. Now I finally got the new one for 2023. So for those, it's available now on Amazon and also at the Pod TV bookstore. So you have two places you can actually buy it. But anyway, got your book.
I know you read the original version, so I strongly recommend that you read Chapter 22, which is the update through the end of 2023. So thank you very much for buying the book. Look, I look forward to hearing Professor Statman, but let me just give a few opening comments. Sorry I couldn't be with you last week, but I had other conflicts that I had to deal with. Several new data points have come out within the last month. Number one, inflation ticked up again on a year-to-year basis last month. Secondly, economic growth was less than expected. And thirdly, unemployment, the increase in employment was less than expected, and the unemployment rate went up. Those are all negative things. We'll see where we go from here. In addition to that, we continue to run deficits and accumulate debt burdens. Our total liabilities and unfunded promises are growing at about 12 million a minute. 12 million a minute. And what's more frustrating is Congress is back to its dysfunctionality. It's not likely much is going to get done for the rest of this year. It is an election year. Hopefully we can get a fiscal commission on a continuing resolution for fiscal 2025. That's what we're going to have. They're not going to get the appropriations bills done on time, but we shouldn't be surprised because they've only got them done on time 4 times in the last 72 years. And the last time they got it done on time was 1996. The last millennium. And last, still disappointed that the major presidential candidates are not addressing the real issues that we need to from an economic standpoint, including our poor financial condition and deteriorating fiscal outlook. And they're also continuing to say they're not going to touch Social Security and Medicare, which are absolutely essential in order to make them solvent, sustainable, secure, in order to put our finances in order. So, that's just a little bit of an update, and I'm sure we'll have a lively exchange, but I look forward to hearing the professor, and I'm sure we'll have a good interchange with regard to what he has to say. I'm glad to hear that he has a new book too, and thanks for showing my book.
Yeah, he's got a new book, but the thing is, if you haven't got the new edition, it is out now, and I actually got the new edition, and yes, I do know about the importance of Chapter 22. I see it on the internet all the time. But now we're going to bring in our special guest. He's a professor of finance at Santa Clara University and also has a new book on this area. So with no further ado, Professor Statman, tell us a little about yourself, your book, and what you're up to.
Well, I'm a professor of finance, and my area is behavioral finance. And what I'm trying to do is expand that circle of finance to move from standard finance, where people are rational, and away from that first generation of behavioral finance, where we describe them as irrational, bumbling irrational. To speak about them as normal people like you, like me, like the people who are listening to us now. And normal people are not stupid. Normal people are intelligent. Sometimes we are ignorant. Sometimes we do foolish things. But the good news is that we can learn and we can become knowledgeable and we can become smart, increasing that ratio of smart to stupid. And I'll of course add some details as we go on.
Okay. Do you have a copy of your book you can show people that you just published so we can take a look at it?
Talk about the name.
There it is. A Wealth of
It,
Well-Being. Right.
Yeah.
Holistic approach to behavioral finances. When I saw this, David, I thought maybe the U.S. government needs to read some of these books. But I guess first they have to be able to read. We do have a whole panel out there that's waiting to bombard you with questions, Dr. Statman. And so we're going to bring in first Bill Denko, who's the co-author. Oh, he wrote some books too. The Millionaire Next Door.
Mhm.
I say required reading of everybody in high school. Richer Than a Millionaire, more required reading, but people don't read that. And he has some comments on behavioral finance also as well. What's your thoughts, Bill?
Yeah, for 31 years, I was a professor of marketing, and I'm now emeritus. You know, Meir, I can tell you it's wonderful not having to go to class on a regular basis. So you're still flying the flag for academia. So I appreciate that. But we have a lot in common. I know that there's been a Nobel Prize in behavioral economics with Professor Gary, the name escapes me, but it was 1992. And when I was teaching a marketing class at the time, and I said, boy, it's about time economists realize that there's more to life than rational behavior. and I think, Meir, you're continuing to further the cause of how real people act, and not always rationally, or a rationality that we just assumed could be modeled very exactly. there's the emotional component, that's for sure. So yeah, I'm excited to hear your thoughts on this, and how we can get our economy humming by better understanding the consumer.
Well, so indeed, finance has for a long time and still now resistant to incorporating knowledge from marketing. So what is clear to people in marketing is really a mystery to people in finance. So I describe what we want when we buy a product or a service as three benefits: a utilitarian, what does it do for me and my pocketbook? Expressive, what does it say about me to myself and other people? And emotional, how does it make me feel? And of course, to people in marketing, it is, well, tell me something new. And so when we buy a watch, the utilitarian benefits are showing me the precise time. Well, you can get that with a Timex that costs $100, or with a Rolex that costs $10,000. So why is it that people buy Rolexes? Well, we know why. They're not stupid. They just want expressive benefits. They want to show other people and perhaps themselves that they have the money to buy a Rolex, and perhaps that they have very good taste. And they want that sense of pride. I've made it, I can afford a Rolex. And the same applies to financial products, to securities, to stocks. And so a long time ago in the 1980s, I became interested in socially responsible investing. And when people, for example, want to exclude fossil fuels or Israel-related stocks from their portfolios, of course, they want still returns. This is the utilitarian benefits, but they also want to be true to their values. And we cannot separate our values from our money. And so, for example, you can see what is going on now on campuses, where the main demand of students is that university endowments divest themselves of Israel-related investments. And so what they're trying to do is really the students try to kind of get to be true to their values, and they want the university to be true to their values, to the students' values, by divesting from those companies that are associated with Israel. And to me, it is just a natural thing. That is, if you think about other products, say hedge funds. If I say to you that I'm into hedge funds, what did I just say? I said I'm a wealthy man. I didn't brag about it. I just noted modestly that I'm into hedge funds. But of course, you get the point, because you know that only people who are wealthy enough can be accepted as investors in hedge funds. And this applies to each and every product and service, including, of course, investment products.
Well, let
Okay,
me.
well, we'll bring in a hedge fund manager then, former hedge fund manager from Australia, who used to manage multi-billion-dollar portfolios, Shaquille Latmer. He's speaking your language. He's saying, hedge fund managers, they're wealthy. Well, what are your thoughts about that, Shaquille?
Well, I can tell you that up until 2020, I wouldn't have been wealthy enough to invest in my own fund. I wouldn't have been allowed to, and if I didn't work there, I wouldn't be allowed to. So whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. I do want to actually say, Professor Statman, I did actually try to purchase your book over the weekend, but it's not available on Amazon Australia. So we'll have to get Amazon to make the book available elsewhere outside of Australia. And to David M. Walker, I don't get a copy of your new book either. So when I get to America, I still want my autographed copy, but perhaps it'll be off the new one.
Well, it's available in Australia because we had a special promotion last week for 3 days, and it was top 10, during those 3 days. But
on Amazon or
yeah,
from your own website?
Amazon. Yeah, on
okay,
Amazon.
I'll look it up and I'll make sure I get a copy.
Yeah.
I still want my autograph, though. I'm coming to Virginia just to get
it. You will get more than one if you want.
To the comment about the college funds in the US are divesting from Israel. Look, I think that's purely based on politics. What I would say is that whenever I see an overinvestment or an underinvestment based on politics, that would represent to me an opportunity. So if Israeli companies are not being invested in as strongly as otherwise would be, then that probably is an opportunity to invest in some of those companies that's worth looking at to see whether they have had a decrease in their share price value and to see whether or not there might be some value there.
Well, that is right. What is interesting is that you have to know some finance to know that when you sell Israel-related stocks, you don't deprive Israel of funds. What you do is you find somebody else who wants to buy it and who either supports Israel or doesn't care about it one way or the other. They just want to make the most money. And if anything, the evidence, including evidence that I found in my research, is that sin companies, tobacco and alcohol and weapon manufacturers and so on, tend to have higher returns than the nice, good companies. And that is because lots of people enjoy those expressive and emotional benefits of excluding them. And then in at least the long run, it means that they're going to yield higher returns to the people who couldn't care less about those expressive and emotional benefits. I don't think that students really understand that unless they've taken some finance. If you ask them, suppose that you divested Israel-related companies or fossil fuel-related companies for that matter, suppose that it means that the endowment has lower returns, and suppose that it means that your scholarship is going to be reduced by 10%, how do you feel? Before they can answer this question, they have to contemplate the fact that there's actually a relationship here, which they did not really account for. I describe it as the difference between waving banners, and in this case, the banners of Palestine are everywhere, and pulling plows, doing actual work. And so if you want to help people in Gaza, there are ways to do that, to raise money, to come over and send foods and so on. But divesting from Israel-related companies, that's sort of waving the flag, but it does not pull plows. It does not do any good for anyone.
And if I could just respond to the sin index, I think there was a sin index before. And I actually had a conversation a couple of years ago about setting up a sin ETF. Although we didn't have weapons manufacturers in there, we did have gambling stocks and cigarette stocks and sugar companies and all sorts of things like that. It's interesting that when the market turns down, that those stocks actually tend to outperform the rest of the market. But I will just say that this actually, what you've just described there, actually works as well in reverse. So there's a lot of emphasis these days on ESG. There's a lot of emphasis in the diversity, the makeup of the board of directors of a company. I don't personally believe that that is that important in and of itself when assessing the financials of the company. It might be important for political reasons, but certainly it's not important when it comes to how well run the company is going to be. And so what you do see is the reverse of the situation where there is an overinvestment in companies based on those metrics. And BlackRock has lost, was it last year or the year before, lost $1 trillion based on investments that they made on diversity quotas and ESG scores. So I think the same thing can work. And I think that people have to put politics aside and be sensible with their own financial decisions and where they think they're actually going to make the most amount of profit within a reasonable ethical framework.
Let me just say just a thing before I let David speak. I think, I have a standard analogy. I said, imagine that you are facing an Orthodox Jew and you say, listen, pork tastes good. It costs less than kosher beef. Why don't you eat pork and donate the savings to the synagogue? Of course, everyone understands that this is absurd. And then I say to people who feel in having stocks of fossil fuel or Israel related, the equivalent of what an Orthodox Jew feels with pork in his mouth, then you cannot really separate the utilitarian and expressive. But I, for example, don't really think that I have to avoid fossil fuel companies to do good. And so I don't. I invest in regular index funds. But I empathize and I understand my brother who is Orthodox, and when he comes to visit, I surely am not going to serve him anything that is not kosher.
But can you buy shares in a pork producing company?
Sorry, David, I did not mean to.
No problem. Well, first, let me admit that I do have a Rolex watch. Although
enjoy.
I don't consider myself wealthy. But I'll be fine. Secondly, many times I find myself just looking at my phone for what the time is rather than the watch. Let me just mention something. One of the many hats that I've worn in the past is I was Assistant Secretary of Labor for ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, which oversees all private pension and employee benefit plans and the fiduciary responsibility, including the investments, reporting prohibited transactions and a variety of issues like that. I think I appreciate your comment about the three different dimensions of consumer behavior. And I'm interested in hearing more about what the major messages are in your book after this. But one comment I would make is it depends on whose money it is. If it's your own money, you can do whatever you want. But when you're a fiduciary, you have a responsibility to look out for the interest of those whose money it is. And in the case of ERISA plans, I had to get involved in many occasions in issues like divestment of South Africa, whether or not you could, have more active investments in union organized companies, divest tobacco, divest guns, fossil fuels, whatever. And the standard from a fiduciary standpoint is the number one criteria is risk and return. The mere fact that you consider incidental factors is not a per se violation of your fiduciary responsibility. However, the burden of proof is on you to be able to demonstrate that you're not unduly compromising risk and return. And now we're seeing some of that come up with regard to ESG and things of that nature as well. So, this goes back a long way. And I think the bottom line is it depends on whose money it is and what your responsibility is with regard to those funds.
And with that, we'll bring in Peter Bennett, speaking about investing his own funds. He's the host of Wall Street Hackers on the Pod TV network. But rather than invest people's funds, he invests private funds. So, Peter, what are your thoughts about that?
A few thoughts. One, I was going to say exactly what several people said, like Shaquille. It's basically totally ineffective in terms of actual impact, except for maybe morally you feel better, or maybe you feel like you're creating a trend. Because the thing is, unless everybody does invest that way, then it won't work, because there are people who will just value the company based on the value. And if you sell, somebody else buys. And that's the way the markets work, because it's a marketplace. So it does maybe people feel better, or maybe they feel they're creating a trend. But in reality, I'm not so sure that. Number 2 point is, it's often very not clear what is going on with ESG causes. I'll give you one example, but throughout ESG, you say, wait a minute, should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? Companies don't even know a lot of times which causes to jump in. But you mentioned fossil fuels, so that's a perfect point to make. So just in this one example, I mean, I can look at natural gas as an example too, where they're fighting natural gas, and yet carbon is going up in 22 and 23 U.S. and worldwide, because they're fighting natural gas equally with oil and coal. But the point I make here, which is even more clear morally, is developing countries are desperately in need of fuel. So they need fuel to heat their homes. They need fuel for transportation. Many people need fuel to cook. So if you believe you want to fight fossil fuels, what about the morality of depriving all these starving people and the economies of the developing world? And the only other point I'd make right now is that I think, and this is just a sense, that there's a trend for ESG to be less important. It's not going away, but it was the flavor of the month for sure. It was so popular years ago, but I see many companies backing off of that to a good extent. And I think that's partly because of the issues I'm raising about clarity and the ineffectiveness of it. So I think there might be a trend to that. David, do you have a comment?
Yeah. A lot of people right now are concerned about sustainability, and young people in particular are concerned about environmental sustainability. Just a few comments on that. One, climate change is real. There's no question about it. Mm-hmm. Man contributes to climate change. And young people are very concerned, and they give a very high priority to environmental sustainability. Well, the truth is, while it's a real issue and we need to be concerned about it, we need to also understand that that problem can't be solved unless we have global cooperation, because air and water don't respect geopolitical boundaries. And while we do emit more carbon than many countries, we're not the worst by far. There are other countries such as China and India and others that are far worse than we are. So they have to play in order to solve the problem. We can't solve it alone. Now, let me pivot for a second. There's another sustainability challenge, which I don't believe that young people are concerned about enough, and that is our deteriorating financial condition and the fact that we're mortgaging the future of young people and future generations when they're going to face a lot tougher competition in the future. That's a situation that we can solve on our own. And if we don't solve on our own, because of the U.S. position with regard to the dollar as the reserve currency, there's going to be serious adverse consequences globally. So I think it's important that we recognize that there's more than one sustainability challenge that exists that we need to come to grips with, some of which we can contribute to the solution because it will affect us. Others, we need to solve the problem, because if we don't solve the problem, it's going to affect a lot of other people.
Okay, we also bring in Dr. Dan Worthington, the former Associate Dean of the University of South Dakota School of Law. Dan, what is your comments about this? And I also know that you have a doctorate in education also as well.
You're unmuted.
You're
Unmuted.
muted. You're muted. We can't hear you, Dan.
I don't disagree with anything that's been said so far. Certainly, our financial situation in the United States is critical. The excessive spending that the government is doing, although feeding the economy, it's not sustainable long term. I think that that's a problem. Yes, the climate does change. Some people think it's getting colder. Some people think it's getting hotter. No one really can agree. A lot of people. Some people are saying the decrease in carbon and other things in the atmosphere is actually causing the globe to go hotter. I mean, it's just all over the place. So I don't know. I mean, much of it's cyclic, that kind of thing. But the economy is definitely the biggest issue I think that we're facing today. Federal government in the United States is trying to give away too much, trying to export too many people in and supporting them on the government's dime. It's not their money; it's our money, and they're spending it like maniacs. They're not being rational about how they're spending it.
Okay, and then a comment, Shaquille. Then we're going to bring our final panelist.
I'll just quickly make the comment. I won't go into the politics of it, but I think that a lot of these companies that are in charge of major, pension funds and things like that are not actually operating in the best interests of the people whose money they're investing, and they're so far removed from it. Oftentimes, in California, for example, a lot of the state pension money for Californian workers is managed by external companies like BlackRock, but there is no direct link between that employee and the people that are making decisions over how that money is invested. And so they do end up going down political lines and investing based on what's politically valuable to them as opposed to what's actually best for them. Also, Dave, just very quickly, while I was away, I think you mentioned that there's $12 billion a minute being spent by the United States.
No. There's the financial hole of the United States is getting deeper, 12 million a minute.
12 million, okay.
A minute.
So that works out to be, if we round up the numbers of people in America to 350 million, that works out to be what, $3.50 per minute or $180 per hour per person? I mean, surely people in America must be at some point going to scream about how terrible this is.
No, that's part of the problem. But let's bring our final panelist in. We're going to bring in Sasha Starr, host of the longest running show that we have on the Pod TV network, Modern Investments, who discusses that. So, Sasha, what is your comments? Make sure you
unmute yourself, Sasha. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
I'm surprised that no one mentioned the idea of divest the hedge funds, mutual funds, and other dormant funds from Israeli companies. This is the most unrealistic thing what you can do if you want to do something for Gaza and for creating a peace in the region. Because what's happened really, if you've been on the stock market, and I'm pretty sure all of you do, let's see you're buying something from somebody who sells it, from another investor or hedge fund or whatever. So it does not change at all capitalization of the target company. If it were worth, say, $10 billion or so, it will remain $10 billion. And if there will be a little bit more buying, so the value probably will grow, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that the university endowment is getting out of the investments in Israeli company does not hurt Israeli company, period. Full stop. It's impossible because instead of one investor, there comes another one. So point number 2 I'd like to make. When you look at these protesters on the campuses, they look like grown-up adults. They look like, remember, they are not. They're brainwashed. They unrealistic in their demands. Absolutely at all. They're hurting themselves instead of studying what they're supposed to do on campuses. They're wasting their time. They will be prosecuted, most of them, I'm pretty sure. And finally, the professors on this campuses, they are not doing their job to make not only someone who will get diploma, but to make somebody a man, a grown-up man. They are not doing their job, and most of them have to be fired from this university as soon as possible, because the most important thing is to get this students to become a grown-up man. And on many shows, I've said that I believe that mandatory military service in America would make the whole society much healthier. Thank you.
If I can turn the discussion from finances to well-being, you know, I often note that the biggest risks in life are not in the stock market. If you want real risk, I say get married. And if you want more risk, have children. People laugh as you do because the point is obvious. And yet that point tends to be overlooked when we talk about financial well-being and even the economics of the United States, and neglect those issues of well-being. And of course, well-being comes from family, marriage, children, friends, work, education, health, religion, and even society. And a lot of the discussion that we have had about ESG really has to do with society. And you can see how many of us, depending on who is going to be elected in November, some of us are going to have enhanced well-being, and some of us are going to have diminished well-being if our favorite candidate has not been elected. This has been the pattern in the past, and that will be the pattern in the future. And so one message that I have is really that we need to change. When people talk about finances, we need to change our perspective and ask ourselves, what does it do to well-being? Yes, obviously you need financial well-being for life well-being. You cannot be poor, very poor, and support a family or afford the doctor. But once you have sufficient financial well-being, the issues really turn, what most important, turns to those issues of life well-being.
Oh, yeah, we have one more panelist who are joining us, Rick Rosner, who is a member of the High IQ Society, which is the mega society. People don't know about it.
I believe in behavioral economics because I believe in informed will, understanding why you make the decisions you're making and places where your brain might be tricking you. And one of those places you just mentioned, which is like family and marriage, and your brain tricks you in the area of sexual attraction because you're an evolved being who came from billions of generations of creatures who needed to reproduce, and reproducing makes you work against sometimes your own best interests as an individual. And it's important to know that your brain might be tricking you. Like when I go to the gym, why am I so interested in looking at women's butts? Oh yeah, because of evolution. So that has nothing to do with other people's butts, have nothing to do with my life at this point. And I need to understand where my brain is messing with me and making me do bad estimates of what's in my best interest.
Well, Rick, I won't comment specifically on that, but I will say that there is a global truth when you're married. If mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy.
Okay, so yeah, the trophy wife thing, for instance, that it's a stereotype that guys hit their 50s and their wives are in their 50s. Oh, they have to dump their a 50-year-old woman for a woman in her 20s or 30s, which is a financial disaster for everybody involved, and it's all because the guy has been tricked by his sex drive into making a terrible decision and is going to be just as miserable but much poorer 5 years later with the trophy wife than he would be if he'd stuck with the woman that he originally married.
Well, for the record, I've been married 52 years for the same woman, and I'm not trading her in.
Well, may I say, as the youngest person on the show, that if the claim is that middle-aged men are really bad with financial decisions, perhaps you should leave it to the younger ones and get out of politics. Let all the young guys come in with their virility and their better sensibilities when it comes to financial decis.
The young
my wife
says
that you should have kids when you're young and stupid, because you don't really calculate the kinds of risks that come with children. Somehow they are not automobiles. You cannot drive them as you wish. And so some of our instincts, of course, drive us in the wrong direction. Some of them drive us in the right direction. Not always is going to be cost and benefit. And children are one example. And trophy wives, of course, it comes to this issue that a lot of well-being is status related. That is, why does somebody who has $1 billion need another billion? Well, the answer is not because they don't have enough stakes. The answer is not even that they don't have enough houses. The answer is that they're competing with Joe, who has $1 billion more than they do. And that is part of human evolution, if you want to talk about those things of evolution. And somebody has to catch them and shake them and say, hey, do you want to be the richest man in the cemetery?
I'd like to make, if I can make 3 comments just quickly. One, refuting that to a point. If you look at least married people, married men live longer than non-married men. Also, if you have children, maybe they help you financially later. So there are some benefits to that. But getting back more to the area of finance, one, Shaquille mentioned U.S. citizens and why don't they wake up? But I want to make the point, and I always make the point on my show, that this is a worldwide phenomenon. I've looked at countries all around the world, South America, Europe, Asia. I don't know if I believe I looked at Australia too. They have very similar situations. They're offering free healthcare for aging demographics, and they haven't put away $1. So it's not just a U.S. phenomena. This is a worldwide phenomena. And that ties into my last point, which is that we're talking about financial well-being. Well, I believe that all of this government debt is going to have a huge impact in terms of the financial well-being of societies around the world. It's going to be very hard, bottom line, to get good returns in the market under these conditions. I believe that countries are going to use yield curve control, force interest rates down. The markets will adjust. There will be inflation, stagflation. It's going to be very hard on people's financial well-being.
Can I just say, that's sort of a question back to Dave as well. My maths was way off from what I said before as soon as I said it, but what does that work out to be, like $180 a fortnight or something? I mean, it's an outrageous amount to increase the debt by per person. It's an outrageous amount of spending that's going on in conjunction with that. And you're right, Peter, that's going on all over the world. And I think that we need to start recognizing that there is not going to be infinite growth. The models that were used 30 and 50 years ago for how we were going to fund social security services assumed infinite amounts of growth, or certainly assumed that there wasn't going to be the kind of decrease in population growth and economic growth that we've seen. So I think that's a real problem. And I'm not sure how to really solve that other than to allow people to have more control. But just as a quick last comment to you, Peter, yes, you're correct that married men live longer than unmarried men, but so do the indoor cats as they look out the window and they enjoy.
Yeah. And this is a question for Dr. Statman. One thing I noticed when I went to college and I spent 10 years collecting degrees, that there was never, ever in any of my classes offered or shown the U.S. budget. Until I met with David, I went and finally read the U.S. budget, which is about $7 trillion of expenditures. Are any classes at Santa Clara? Do you offer a class, or do you someone show the U.S. budget? I think everybody should at least, it's 188 pages, so at least read the U.S. budget. What is your thoughts on that, Dr.
I'm sure that there are many classes at Santa Clara where those issues of budget and the macroeconomy come up. That is not really my expertise or my interest. And there are lots of people on this panel who know macroeconomics better than I do. But I think that some of those concerns, some people talk about what's going to happen to the younger generation if we spend all of that. What people seem to neglect is that people live in families. And so it is my daughters who are going to benefit from the extra money that I have accumulated as a baby boomer. And somehow, you don't really see that storm, the generational storm that people have been forecasting. And the reason for that is that people support their children, people support their elderly parents, people still behave as members of families, ensuring one another. And again, I'm talking, of course, about parents who have sufficient means to help, but even people who don't are in that what we know as the sandwich generation, caring for both children and elderly parents. So yeah, I'll leave the macroeconomy to you, and if you leave the family to me.
Okay, we have another panelist who's joined us, Kim Calhoun. You notice this is a male-dominated group in finance and economics. So Kim, I don't know what your thoughts. You just got back from Bali and Denver and San Francisco. So tell us, what are your thoughts about this behavioral economics and investing?
I think it's just a difference in the way that the children are taught from the time that they're very young. They kind of separate men from women. Even today, you see the girls over here and the boys over here. They teach boys more about finances and more of the math brain and things like that. I think it's the way it's introduced. And it's funny you bring that up, because after this journey, I've decided I'm going to sit down and write a book for children on the subject of finance and how to better manage your future. And I think that that's just something that we don't influence and inspire enough, not just in the younger schools, which is something that David has always pushed for, which I've always respected David for doing this, is that he said, no, we don't need to teach it in high school. We need to start teaching it in elementary school or even younger. And I just think that it's what we influence people to do. You find that women tend to get bored with the subject, and it's just the way, you approach it. And women and men are different. And, I'm blessed enough that I can tolerate you guys enough that I can come on board and enjoy the conversations. I learn so much from the men's side of the world. I really do.
All right. Yes, Mr. Rosner.
So for hundreds of years, a growing population creating more consumers has powered the economy. But now 1/4 of the countries on Earth have shrinking populations. And by the end of the century, it will be 3/4 of the countries on Earth. And we have to figure out how to do capitalism with a shrinking population. In one way, it's good. If you have fewer people, then they make less pollution, and that helps with climate change. But it's terrible for like taking care of old people, because Social Security, US, Japan, wherever, when you don't have enough young people kicking into the economy, there aren't enough people to take care of the olds, and there's not enough money to take care of the olds.
Yeah.
Sure.
Which is a big problem that we have. By the way, David, what about behavioral economics with the people in Washington, D.C.? It seems to me that their behavior is they just ignore this. I noticed and the media ignores it too. First thing on television was the weather. That means it's a slow news day. It's been the weather a lot. No one talks about what you're talking about. The interest on the debt, largest budget item, the U.S. government basically heading down the financial toilet hole. What is it going on in Congress in terms of their behavior, since you worked in the Tower of Power?
Well, first, America is not top 25 in the world in math. That's a new four-letter word for fiscal policy. You'd be able to consider the math. The other thing is this is an election year. And I don't think anything else is likely to get done this year by this Congress other than a continuing resolution to fund the government for next year. They're not going to be in session that long. They take off August. They're going to go out in no later than mid-October, probably early October, for the election. Unfortunately, we've got a situation now where it's not just the partisan divide, it's the ideological divide. We've divided the country between those who believe in the principles and values under which the country was founded, and I would argue that made us great. Things like limited but effective government, individual liberty and opportunity, personal responsibility and accountability, rule of law and equal justice under the law, fiscal responsibility and intergenerational equity, and stewardship. Those are founding principles and the test of time that got us to where we are today. But now we have a group that wants to promote growing government, increase dependency on government, take control of healthcare, take control of education, don't worry about deficits, don't worry about debt. That combined with the fact that the margins are so close in the House and the Senate, then every election is about control. And believe me, the minority has no power in the House, so has some power in the Senate because of the filibuster rule. And now we've got two presidential candidates who, frankly, aren't leading on this issue. So
Agree.
We'll see what happens. As I say, the biggest deficit in Washington is a leadership deficit. And I invented a new word. It's called laggardship.
I love it.
Leadership. That's what we have.
David, when you start hearing that around the world, I've been sharing that for you. When I was in Bali and I met people from all over the world, and I mean all over the world, Russia, everywhere. One of the concerns of the people the minute they found out I was from America is, what on earth is going on there? You guys have no interest in a real government anymore. That look at your leadership decisions that you're making right now, that you're picking two of the worst candidates ever. One so old he should be moved on, and the other old, but always in, 1 foot in, I always say this too, 1 foot in prison. And it was a constant question to me, are you left or right? And I go, I'm neither. Just because the media teaches the rest of the world we're either left or right doesn't mean we're all that way. And there is great concern from many of us, but unfortunately, the majority of the people are either left or right, and that outweighs what's right, respectfully right. But that was the biggest concern of many of the people. And then I read this quote while I was traveling, or heard it, and it said, a strong America is the only thing standing in the way of a new world order. I don't really know what that means.
Oh, I do.
But it sticks with me on the fact that we're not focused on the right priorities. Go ahead, David, share me.
I talk about it in the book. Okay.
Okay. I need to read your
basically
book.
we have an alignment of interest against the United States economically, diplomatically, militarily, and culturally. It's led by China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And now with BRICS Plus, things are being done to try to undercut the United States in general, and in particular with regard to the dominance of the dollar as a reserve currency around the world. But as I said, some of our problems we cause and we can solve.
Right.
And I would respectfully suggest that a majority of the American people are in what I would call the sensible center, center right, center left. The wingnuts have taken over. Far right, far left, they're the problem. And so that's why the first three words of the Constitution have to come alive. We, the people, we're responsible and accountable for what does and doesn't happen. And I'm sad, too, about the options that we're going to be given this year. And so once again, we're going to probably have to select between the lesser of two evils. And I don't like voting for evil.
We've been equally divided for decades to our detriment. The last president to get more than 53% of the popular vote was the first George Bush in 1988. So FDR, landslide president. Nixon, second term landslide president. Reagan, landslide president. They each got, FDR obviously did stuff different from Nixon and Reagan, but they all got stuff done because they had more of a mandate. We haven't had a mandate in decades.
Well, and part of the problem is they don't run enough on issues and solutions, right? I mean,
No, they don't.
That's part of the problem. You need an issue-oriented and solutions-based campaign. If you do that, you can get a mandate. But if you don't do that, even if you win, you won't have a mandate.
Can I just let everyone know I've got the US debt clock up on one of my other screens, and while we've been talking, the US total debt has actually ticked over the 100 trillion mark. That's the first time that's ever been as high as that. It's it's a concern. The debt to GDP since I was born has quadrupled in the United States. I think that is such a serious issue. I've got a question for you, Dan. If we could. David, if we could wave a magic wand, I don't know, there's an international Powerball for countries. The United States happens to win it and was able to pay off all of the debt today. What do you think would change in the United States?
Well, first, I think our politicians too many of them have become career politicians.
That's right.
Which is not what the founders intended. They've become addicted to spending, deficits, and debt. So it would mean we'd start over again. But my view is the government's grown too big, promised too much, subsidized too many, lost control of the budget, and is not focused on generating results.
If you paid everything off, would you start again? Would just go straight back to the same position again?
Right. I think you'd start over again. Right. But what we have to have a constitutional amendment that will limit the growth of the government and will limit how much debt as a percentage of the economy we can take on. Only a constitutional amendment can bind current and future Congresses, and only a constitutional amendment can provide us with the assurance that we need that will return to stewardship and discontinue mortgaging the future of our country and our younger generations. And
I'd like to say that, Shaquille, that's a good question, but here's the problems. Number one, the debt, according to David, and I think he's a good estimate, is $125 trillion counting unfunded liabilities. That is more money just in the United States, not to mention, again, I've said other countries have very similar situations. That $125 trillion is more money than all U.S. stocks, U.S. bonds, and privately held real estate in the United States. So what would happen? Well, the question, and it's going to happen eventually, is how do you deal with that? How could you? There isn't enough money in the world. The bottom line is it means printing money is the only way to pay it off. So,
which is inflation.
Well, inflation, stagflation, and that's
stag.
Right.
Yeah.
We're going to have a lame duck president after this election for 4 years, which means that president could be pressured into making unpopular decisions. If like the No Labels campaign didn't get a candidate out there, but you could pressure the next president to take some fiscal. I don't trust Trump to make good financial decisions based on his record, but perhaps Biden could be pressured into some austerity. You like to mention the last person who did that was Bill Clinton in the 90s.
But Bill Clinton, though, Rick, Bill Clinton was sort of like the third way, wasn't he? He didn't go down the traditionally left-right politics as what Kim was describing. He was much more sort of taking the best of both worlds. I'll break Peter Bennett's heart. You're 100 trillion off. The unfunded liabilities of the US is currently sitting at 215 trillion, according to the debt clock.
Actually, David taught me this. He said that when you look at that debt clock, it's an infinite clock. So they're not really looking at any limit on the time. So that's not really a fair analysis in a way, although you could look at it that way too. But I'll go with David's numbers, a more realistic number. You don't want to go out ad infinitum.
And let me clarify. Let me clarify the numbers that I use. I don't use the numbers on the debt clock. I can tell you that. I mean, the only number that's good on the debt clock is actually the debt subject to the debt ceiling limit. What I look at is I look at the financial statements of the U.S. government, and if you look at the financial statements of the U.S. government, and if you add total liabilities, which includes debt held by the public, unfunded civilian and military pensions, retiree health care, et cetera. If you look at unfunded social insurance obligations, and if you look at those items primarily, and based on a 75-year horizon, which is what the Social Security Medicare trustees are required to do, which is what's in the financial statements. And as you know, I used to be a trustee of Social Security Medicare. The number as of September 30, 2023 was about $125 trillion. You can make it bigger if you want to do infinity or if you want to do a closed group analysis. But I think 125 trillion, as has been said before by Peter, is big enough.
That's enough. That's enough.
Okay.
We'll add that to the current debt.
Not a problem.
Add that to the current debt.
We're getting close to the hour.
What happens to
I would
state
like to
debts
get
and their
final
liabilities?
comment
How are they
from,
going to fund things?
So 125 trillion is $370,000 in debt for every single American. And we have to figure out how are we going to earn that much money for every American into the future.
We're getting close to the hour, so I'd like some final comments with Professor Statman, please.
Well, again, I will leave the issue of the macro to the many people on this panel who know more than me. But I think that people on the panel seem to be of one kind, or one political inclination. And of course, democracy and the fact that we have this pretty much even split in the population suggests that other people think differently, and you can see what it does to well-being. I'm sure that the well-being of people who concerned about the debt is lower because they spend time worrying about it, and others do not. We cannot really solve things by dictatorship, even lame duck dictatorship. We really have to reason and figure out the facts and then proceed from there. And I, of course, trust Dave as much as anyone to do just that.
Okay, and with that, we're going to have to take off because we're at the hour. We want to thank the Honorable David M. Walker, former Comptroller General of the United States, our special guest, Meir Statman, Professor of Finance at Santa Clara, University of Santa Clara, Bill Danko, of course, which I like his books, Richard, a Millionaire, Millionaire Next Door, and the panel from around the world. And we'll see you next week on Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. And by that time, hopefully I'll have your book, Dr. Statman. Take care. Bye-bye.